If you're just getting into the world of small and medium form factor camera gear like DSLR or mirrorless cameras, point and shoot cameras, video monitors, small LED lights, or even smartphone holders, or other small or medium-sized pieces of audiovisual gear, you may have heard the term Arca Swiss or Arca Swiss plate. But what is Arca Swiss? Well, Arca Swiss is a very simple two-part quick-release mounting system that you can add to your existing camera or similar equipment, and it intends to make the mounting and dismounting of your equipment to tripods and other mounting hardware universal and quick. It consists of a dedicated Arca Swiss plate and a receiving Arca Swiss clamp that grips and holds that plate. And it's not brand specific, it's more or less a standard dimensional size of plates and clamps that any manufacturer can adopt. And that means you aren't always having to change the plates on your equipment just to use a different tripod. The name Arca Swiss comes from the company Arca Swiss, who not only manufactures cameras, but also began making this two-part quick-release design that so many companies now copy. And although you can still get legitimate Arca Swiss equipment and quick-release systems that are manufactured for high precision, most of the equipment out there for us consumers is Arca Swiss-like because most of the companies adhere to the style of system, just not always the tight machining tolerances, which helps with compatibility across brands. However, not all manufacturers in this market have chosen to adopt the Arca Swiss standard, but many have. The plates are usually mounted to your equipment, like your camera, while a receiving clamp is either built into or mounted to something like a tripod, a ball head, a friction arm, or mini tripod, and gives you a quicker way to mount your equipment instead of always having to screw your equipment directly onto the receiving device. Arca Swiss plates are based on a dovetail-shaped design. That is, if we look at the plate on its cross-section, we can see that the edges of the plate are angled, and any Arca Swiss compatible receiving clamp has opposing or oppositely slanted walls or jaws that match that same dovetail angle and grip the plate when the clamp is tightened down. On this clamp and many clamps, it's a simple round knob for tightening and makes for a usually fairly strong grasp of the plate and therefore of the equipment you have the plate attached to. And because of that dovetail design, it makes it more difficult for the plate to come out of the clamp vertically. We'll talk about horizontally in a minute. Arca Swiss is a dimensional standard of plates and clamps, and that dimension is 38 millimeters wide for the plates. And there are square plates that can be mounted in either orientation in most clamps, and rectangular plates that can only be mounted in one direction, with the shorter distance of that rectangular plate still being 38 millimeters. Some manufacturers' plates vary a tiny bit in their dimensions and machining, with some measuring, a millimeter or two smaller or larger. Some manufacturers' plates are thicker, but overall, most Arca Swiss plates will fit into most other generic Arca Swiss clamps from other manufacturers. And there are some slightly proprietary clamps or receivers out there that not all other plates will fit into. More on that in just a bit. As I said, the dovetail design means that the plate can't always be pulled vertically out of the mount, even when the clamp is not completely tightened down. However, you have to be careful as not all Arca Swiss clamps will keep the plate from moving horizontally if not completely tightened down. So your equipment could potentially still slide sideways out of the clamp, even if the plate can't move out vertically. But some plates have additional retention screws on the bottom that help as a horizontal stop, so that when you use these style plates with compatible clamps, even if you accidentally don't completely lock down the clamp, the plate can't move vertically because of the dovetail design, and the retention screws on the bottom will keep it from sliding sideways out of the clamp, providing a bit of extra security if you don't completely tighten it down. This depends on the plate and the clamp, but it is a feature on some gear. But really, one of the main benefits of an Arca Swiss system is that it's not tied to a single manufacturer or brand. It's a standard that, again, any manufacturer can adopt. And there are many brands that make Arca Swiss compatible plates or plates and clamps, so you don't always have to stick to a single brand, and that's what makes it fairly universal. The plates usually have a 1/4 20 bolt pre-installed that lives on the plate, and therefore the plate can be installed on any gear that has a standard 1/4 20 mount. And for those of you that don't know, 1/4 20 means a bolt and receiving mount that is 1/4 inch in diameter with a thread measurement of 20 threads per inch, or simply called 1/4 20 for short. Some of these 1/4 20 bolts on the plates have thumb screws, which do not require any tools to install, but some require either a screwdriver or Allen wrench to tighten down. There are also some Arca Swiss plates that have a larger 3/8 bolt for mounting on larger gear with 3/8 receivers, or some have a 1/4-20 and 3/8 bolt. And when you get into heavier gear, you usually don't want to rely on just the small 1/4-inch diameter bolt. You'd want to usually move up to larger plate and clamp systems. Once the plate is affixed to your gear, you mount any Arca Swiss compatible clamp to something else you want to mount the gear to, again like a small articulating arm or small tripod. And this, of course, allows you to quickly put the gear on the mount and remove it. Now, this isn't a necessary item, as any gear that already has a 1/4-20 bolt, like a small articulating arm or friction arm, can usually just screw directly onto your gear, but that's not always efficient depending on your needs, and just doesn't allow for quick deployment and removal. And most gear in this section of the audiovisual market has one or several 1/4-20 mounting points. Most cameras have a 1/4-20 receiver built right into the bottom of the camera, as do most small video monitors and most small LED lights. Arca Swiss plates and clamps are usually a third-party accessory or kit that you have to purchase separately, either as a plate clamp kit, or some equipment has actually incorporated Arca Swiss mounting points or rails usually, so you don't have to add an additional plate. For example, this L bracket and grip that is on my Sony ZV-1 camera, even though it is another piece of equipment that I've had to add to the camera, if we look at the bottom here, we can see right here that it has a square plate that measures 38 millimeters in this direction and has dovetails on the back and front built right into the bottom. And the same goes for this larger L bracket for my Sony a7 III. It has that 38 millimeter rail built directly into the bottom. And most tripods marketed at the DSLR and mirrorless camera market usually have a built-in Arca Swiss compatible clamp, usually right on top of the ball head. Almost every tripod I own has these clamps on top, and they come with their own style plates usually, but again, most of these plates can still be used on other manufacturers' receiving clamps. So I can take this plate that came with my K&F concept tripod and just put it on anything I want, but then mount it to this other Ulanzi tripod, because again, both tripods have that generic Arca Swiss clamp with a simple turn knob for tightening. And I can also use these square peak design plates on either tripod as well, or any of these other generic plates I have around my office. As I said, not every manufacturer has chosen to go with the Arca Swiss standard. Manfrotto tripods and plates have a similar design, but aren't compatible with Arca Swiss clamps. And cheaper tripods like you'd find at big box stores or online also usually have a quick release plate and clamp design, like this $20 Amazon Basics tripod. You can see it also has that dovetail style plate, but these cheaper tripods don't usually adhere to any standard sizes, so you kind of have to use only this tripod with only this plate, and they are most often too large for any standard Arca Swiss clamp, not to mention the fact that this is a much bigger plate than something like a Peak Design plate, which is just a lot more small and compact. Now, there are some quirks and cons of the Arca Swiss design. One quirk is that even though most plates I've found are fairly universal when using simple knob tightening style clamps like these, not all clamps can receive all plates. But that's usually when a brand has made a more proprietary, usually some sort of slide-in quick release system. For example, Peak Design has their own Arca Swiss plates, and they have some quick release clamps like their capture system, but the capture receiving clamp can only receive Peak Design plates. Attempting to use a different brand's Arca Swiss plate and insert that into a Peak Design capture receiver usually won't work, because the plate will be slightly too large or slightly too small, or have a slightly different angle on their dovetails. However, that same Peak Design plate can still fit into any of my tripods or other, generic Arca Swiss clamps. And despite the fact that most manufacturers are still adhering to that size standard, there's still small enough machining differences between brands that make that brand's plates only fit into their more proprietary quick release systems. But again, those brands' plates can usually fit into almost any other generic clamp. The same goes for these Falcam F38 plates. Falcam has their own proprietary slide-in quick release that only works with Falcam F38 Arca Swiss plates. Falcam slide-in clamps won't receive most other manufacturers' plates, but the Falcam F38 plate will fit into most other generic Arca Swiss clamps. So the different brands still mostly adhere to a plate that is within very close Arca Swiss measurements, but still has minute and different tolerances and slightly different dovetail angles that just make the plates from different manufacturers not work with the proprietary slide-in clamps of other manufacturers. But again, they still work on almost any generic Arca Swiss clamp. Most of my tripods and Arca Swiss clamps are the universal style that have enough wiggle room and adjustment to still be able to work with these small measurement differences between manufacturers' plates. And I have thus far only come across one generic clamp that won't fully tighten down on the Falcam brand plates. And that clamp is this one from NiceRig. It looks to be shaped and sized properly, and it will fully grip every other Arca Swiss plate that I have, except for the Falcam F38 plates. And in this case, I think it's the fault of the Falcam F38 plates being machined ever so slightly differently, but that's only one clamp out of probably about 20 to 25 clamps that I own. Another con of the Arca Swiss system is that if you leave the plate attached to your gear, it just makes that piece of gear bigger, possibly unable to fit into cases the same way, and it won't sit flat on a surface most of the time, and you could, and I have, more easily scratched surfaces with that plate underneath. And I do find it a bit cumbersome on some of my equipment, like this fairly thin Atomos Shinobi 5-inch monitor. This plate pretty much lives on the bottom of the monitor, but now it makes the overall monitor kit just a bit larger because the plate is wider than the monitor itself. And sometimes that can just get in the way if you really want to pack this in a very thin, small case or in a small slot in a bag. The plate can prohibit you from just making things a little more compact. However, recently I've seen and purchased some very small rectangular plates that still measure 38 millimeters in their longest direction, but they basically kind of cut a square plate in almost half and just made it more narrow. This is great because it means you can keep your slim gear slim by installing the plate along the plane of the device, kind of like here on this Atomos Shinobi monitor. But the downside is that you can only usually mount these skinnier plates in one direction in the receiving clamp, often meaning the tightening knob can be a bit more difficult to get to, but I still kind of like these more narrow plates for some gear. Another con, as I said, it only usually relies on the small 1/4 inch diameter bolt system, or 1/4-20. So if you do start getting into heavier gear, or even just adding a larger and heavier lens to your camera, the added weight can put a lot of strain on that small 1/4 inch 20 receiver on your camera, and that could damage your equipment if you're not careful. I have had some cheaper equipment actually have the 1/4 inch 20 mount break out of the equipment entirely. This happens more often with equipment that has a mostly plastic housing around the metal 1/4 inch 20 receiver. And since the Arca Swiss design is usually based on a single mounting point, that means the plates can still spin or get twisted while installed on your gear, even when locked down as tight as you think they can be tightened. So your gear can then be loose and move around a bit, and you have to dismount it and then re-tighten the plate. I think the last con for me is that if you choose to have Arca Swiss plates and clamps on your gear, the clamps can also make your small gear larger overall. For example, this small Manfrotto Pixie tripod is fairly compact and slim, but that means I'd always have to spin the tripod into the gear or vice versa. So if I choose to just always have an Arca Swiss clamp attached, it now becomes this more T-shaped tripod and just less compact overall. And the same goes for all of my other mini tripods. They now just have this more perpendicular clamp at the top. And yes, I can remove the Arca Swiss clamps from some of my mini tripods, but that kind of defeats the purpose of having a quick release system. So I've just tried to find the smallest clamps I can and leave them on my gear. But I've pretty much adopted Arca Swiss on everything. I have a ton of different plates, and I have receiving clamps all over the place in my home office, on my tripods, even in my office at work, plates and clamps in my bag. And it really makes for quick install and dismount of my equipment versus always having to grab a small tripod and twist the tripod onto the gear, or try to twist the gear onto a mount somewhere. So that's it. That's basic Arca Swiss plates and clamps, and of course my feelings on the pros and cons of using them or not. I hope some of this information has been informative, and if it has, leave this video the old thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.